Franklin Planning Board meeting on May the 17th at 7 p.m. All rise for a flag salute, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Rosemary, the open public meeting statement, please.
Notice of this meeting has been given as required by the Open Public Meetings Act and the annual notice of meetings. A copy was posted to the township website, and a notice of this meeting was sent to Centennial, and a copy was posted at the township municipal building.
All right, thank you. Let's seat Mr. Clark for Heather Flame this evening, and Mr. Ranson for Joe Sweet, please. And I know we're already seated. The roll call, please.
Mayor Bruno?
Here.
Mr. Clark?
Here.
Mr. Constantine? Mrs. Flame? Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Mr. Milady? Chairman Pesh?
Here.
Mr. Ranson?
Here.
Mr. Stivic has asked to be excused. Mr. Zweed? Mr. Trevelyan?
Here.
Mr. Borelli?
Here.
Mr. Diarmentio? Mr. Dockney?
Here.
And I am President Rosemary Flaherty.
All right, thank you. Let's see, next on the agenda, resolution PB 21-06 for block 701, lot 14. Is there a motion to approve that resolution?
Make a motion.
I have a motion and a second. Rosemary, for roll call vote, please.
Mr. Bruno?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Abstain.
Mr. Pesh?
Yes.
Mr. Ranson?
Yes.
Mr. Trevelyan?
Yes.
And we'll move on to PB 21-03 for block 1306, lot 17 for Comito. Roll call, motion to accept the resolution, please.
Motion to approve PB 2203.
And moved and seconded. Rosemary, roll call, please.
Mayor Bruno?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Abstain.
Mr. Pesh?
Yes.
Mr. Ranson?
Yes.
Mr. Trevelyan?
Yes.
Okay, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. The minutes were submitted electronic. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion.
And second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I have to abstain, I was absent this month.
Okay, so noted. Next on the agenda is PB 22-04 for Deborah Green for a lot line adjustment. Rosemary, is there a print for this?
There was none.
There's no?
No,
print?
it's just it's a lot line adjustment, and I believe that there was only a few sheets that were provided to us, so we gave them to the engineer and the board.
Okay, will you, all right, and, let's move forward. And do you have a print?
I'm going to give you mine.
All right, we'll move back to you in a moment. Oh,
You can have
there we
mine.
go. All right. Move that, I have one, and if you would open that, sir, and share that. Thank you. Mr. Wolsey, good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Mayor, members of the board. For the record, I'm Robert Wiltsey, an attorney with Hoffman Museo, representing the joint applicants, Debbie Green, who's with me this evening, and then her aunt and uncle Raymond and Aunt Claire, who live on the adjoining property. Debbie owns block 4003, lot 1, which is the corner of Porchtown, Williamstown, and Delsey Drive, and her aunt and uncle own 4003, lot 2. Before we begin, Mr. Borelli, can we confirm that the board had jurisdiction on this matter?
Yes, notice was properly provided.
Thank you. And can we swear in Deborah Green, please?
Raise your right hand. Swear testimony you're about to give me the truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you.
Okay. So this is a lot line adjustment application. No new lots are sought to be created. And it's basically a kind of a mix-up that's occurred through family ownership of these two lots. Deborah owns the larger lot, which she obtained from her mother approximately 5 or 6 years ago. So she didn't do title search or survey or any of those things at that point because it was an intra-family transfer. She just knew it was, everything seemed to be okay. And then when her septic failed and she went to Mr. Ewing to look into the construction of a new septic field, Mr. Ewing determined that Debbie's house actually encroached onto her aunt and uncle's property, roughly 9 or 10 feet. So that led to some discussions about how do we address this problem. I suppose one of the ways, and we talked about this, was since it was between the family members, we would try and work up some cross easements and that sort of stuff. But the consensus was that although a subdivision or lot line adjustment would be more expensive and take a little more time, at least it would address the problems. If we did something like an easement, we'd end up with possible problems with liability, with insurance coverage, not to mention the fact that Debbie wouldn't own part of her own house. So this is the recourse that we come up with to bring it before this board for a lot line adjustment. The one thing that certainly concerned me when we looked at the plan was that we had a couple pre-existing non-conforming uses. And naturally, as an attorney, you like to come in front of the board and say, well, what we're going to do here is we're going to make the non-conformity minimal, or at least lessen it. And unfortunately, in this case, because of the particular facts, we end up having to take both of these lots that are non-conforming, and her aunt and uncle's lot is actually, if the board grants this, is going to become a little more non-conforming than it was before. You'll see from the zoning district schedule that Mr. Ewing has created that it is going to make that lot 2 a little bit smaller in order to have to give Debbie the house that she lives in. So that, in a nutshell, is the application. As far as the proofs, we did not feel it necessary to hire a planner to give testimony, but I think it should be pretty well self-evident that there isn't really going to be any detriment to the area. Debbie, I know you're not a planner, but can you see any way, or have you anticipated any way in which, if the board allowed you to move that lot line, it would cause any problem to either you, to any of the neighbors, to the character of the neighborhood?
No.
Okay, all right. And I think your planner or your engineer, or both with their joint letter, made it clear as far as the standards under New Jersey law, it's got to be some substantial hardship, or at least try to do something that made sense. Or that the proposed conditions represent a preferable zoning alternative to conformance with the requirements of the ordinance. And that's what I would submit to this board, generates this and supports this application. So unless the board has any questions of me or of Ms. Green, that is our presentation this evening.
Chris, is there any comments?
Frankly, there's not much to say here in terms of the practical reality here. I want to confirm no actual construction is proposed at this point. You're not building anything new. It's literally just changing the invisible line between your property and your aunt and uncle's property.
The only construction is the septic field.
Okay, septic going on.
That's the whole purpose of doing this, yes.
That's all underground, so that's really not,
Yes, sir.
not subject to zoning anyway. And working for the county on that regard would be reviewing any septic. But practically, the result of this will be absolutely nothing, basically. So we're talking about the invisible line between their two properties. to clarify what was done before, there are existing non-conforming lots and potentially non-conforming structure. There's no non-conforming use here. Both the single-family residences on each lot are permitted uses in the RA district. So we're talking about two undersized lots, both of which are going to remain undersized. One is getting a little bit bigger, one's getting a little bit smaller, so it's a net wash, and the actual impact on the community is absolutely nothing because it's all already there. The one point I would disagree with them on is I think this qualifies under a hardship rather than the flexible, preferable zoning alternative, because the house is already in place, and don't know how it got to be that way, but it seems a bit impractical as they were discussing that this is really their only action here is to adjust this lot line to get much closer to conformity than they are at this point, where a house is actually straddling a lot line, which I think you can classify that as a practical hardship.
Okay.
Yes.
Ed?
Minor comments, mainly just some clearing up some notes on the plans. The one comment I just want to bring to the attention is there's certain variances being sought, and it appears on proposed lot 2 that the variance being requested for the minimum rear yard setback 75 feet is actually not applicable. It is 87.01 feet has been provided. Just wanted to bring that to the attention. Everything else is just minor submissions that will need from their surveyor to the application.
Michael?
This is very straightforward. I think they definitely have a hardship. You have a lot line passing through a house, so it's the best room.
And follow up with Rosemary. Any comment? No? Okay. Any questions from the board?
Possible. Because both these lots are pre-existing undersized lots, and because we're moving a property line, and because indeed there is a variance involved here for lot size, is this a request by the board proper to ask that there be no further construction, even though they've stipulated it in their application? Should it be in the deed language of the resolution, is my question. How does the applicant feel, Mr. Wiltsey?
I haven't had a chance to discuss that with Ms. Green, but I hesitate to recommend that just because I don't know what her plans would be in the future. I assume, Debbie, do you have an answer to Mr. Treviglio's questions? He's asking if you would agree to limit any further subdivision or construction?
Oh, yeah, we're not planning on building anything, it's
But I
just
think
for
by
the...
putting it in the deed, we're creating a hardship.
That's what that's why I hesitate to recommend that.
If, if that was the case, if they sell, exactly, if they sell it in the future, I believe at that point, it'll be going back to one of the boards for approval at that point. So I can't see restricting a person's deed based on the fact that they're trying to do the right thing by moving a lot line to be able to put a septic system in.
And
Do you agree, Michael?
Yeah, the only thing they could do is necessary accessory uses like garage. If that ends up being too large or too close to
They're
the
not going to be
property
able to put it
line.
on top of the septic system or
Yeah, right, for sure.
meet the sidelines and
So you can't put two single-family dwellings on one lot, so
Right.
that would be a variance. So they really
Right.
can't do anything without a variance anyway.
Got it. Okay.
Wouldn't that affect your aunt and uncle also, if you're restricting one side because you've moved the property line? Wouldn't that affect the other side as well?
Possibly.
Yes,
Possibly.
Yeah.
I think it-
I don't see the necessity myself personally, but I'll yield to the board. Anybody else has comments? All right, at this time I'll entertain a motion to open this application to the public. I got a motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, at this time we're open to public comment on PB
22-4.
22-04. All right. Hearing none, seeing none. At this time, I entertain a motion to close public portion. Motion. Moved, seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Mr. Wilson?
Members of the board, I don't have anything else to add. I agree with all the comments that have been made by your professionals this evening. We just asked for the board's cooperation in straightening out a problem. I did kind of bring up, in response to your concern, that this was not any sort of a hardship that my client created. Unfortunately, I suppose if she had done a title search when she got the property, maybe it would have come to light earlier, but I don't know that it would have amounted to a hill of beans with this board or with us. But the point I did want to make is that Deborah had this kind of pushed onto her with the acquisition of the property from her mother. It was not any sort of a hardship that she created.
Okay. That'll be placed on the record, and I'm the belief that the positive negative criteria has been met with the need to repair a septic system. So at this time, I entertain a motion.
Make a motion.
Second. And that was a motion to approve?
Approve, correct.
And I have a motion, second. Roll call vote, please.
Mayor Bruno?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Ranson?
Yes.
Mr. Chevaloon?
Yes.
Mr. Pesh?
Yes. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Mr. Chairman, if I may indulge the board for just a minute. I think some of you folks are aware, I'm retiring from the firm, and I have with me my successor this evening, and I'd like to introduce him to the board. This is Ryan Hoffman.
He's going to be able to fill those shoes?
Time will tell.
Certainly not the pants.
But anyway, for those you know, Ryan's dad is Richard Hoffman, who is an appellate court judge. But Ryan's been with us, I guess, 6 or 7 years, and he's been doing my work now for 6-7 months, and he'll be appearing in the future. And I just want to say I loved appearing in front of this board, all the cooperation I've gotten, the respect I've been shown. So thank you all very much.
Congratulations on your semi-retirement. and like I said,
I'm getting there.
Please show me how that happens. Mr. Hoffman, welcome.
Thank you.
The only pleasure I have is that someday your Uncle Joe stands in front of his brother and has to call him Your Honor.
Unfortunately, I don't think that'll happen.
That would be my highlight.
No, he's got about 2 months to go.
So again, thank you very
Pleasure
much.
to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you. Okay. Okay, reports, Secretary's report.
Okay, so the general revenue fund for all the board applications for the month was $1,350. The total escrow was $4,650. The payments processed to professionals, although I made a few of them today in addition to this, for CME it was $5,775.50. And for Mr. Borelli, it was $9,749.50. The township ordinance for the solar is in everybody's packet. That would be the latest revision. So please take a look at that. And the State Agriculture Development Committee report for 2020 and 2021 is also in your packet, as well as the fair share for the prior and the third round for affordable housing.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's see. Motion to accept the Secretary's report, please.
Motion.
I have a motion, second.
Second.
Moving seconded. Roll call vote. There's dollars involved.
Sorry, Chairman. Mayor Bruno?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Ranson?
Yes.
Mr. Chevaloon?
Yes.
Chairman Pesh?
Yes. Okay. Next on the agenda under reports is the Franklin Township Fair Share Housing, third round affordable housing obligation. Has everybody had a chance to review this?
Yes.
You good?
A little confusing.
I've been part of that for a lot of years, and it's confusing.
You pay money
Yeah.
for what?
Okay. Michael, what are they looking for here? Just a approval to a review and a.
It's your standard review pursuant to municipal land use law. If it's going to be an ordinance. In this case, a review by the planning board, it was going to be an ordinance. In this case, actually have a court, it's a court case. It's basically an agreement that has to be approved by the court. Prior to it going to the court for a fairness hearing, they have to have the agreement reviewed and adopted by the township committee. I mean, Jake could possibly shed some light on that. They're in the process of having to do that. Once they do that, then ordinances have to be adopted and there's further hearings and so forth. A think, I assume, Chris, are you the planner who's been involved in it? Or your firm?
We were involved a little bit a few years ago, I guess, but we have not been involved since. I briefly looked over the report. These things are, put it this way, unfortunately, the way that affordable housing is in New Jersey, there's only so much you can do here, and at this point, my understanding is that they're sending it really as a courtesy for you to be in the loop of what's going on. But once the settlement is signed by the town and Fair Share Housing Center, then, like you said, it goes to a fairness hearing, and after the fairness hearing, assuming the judge approves of this agreement, that through this agreement and these two, or I think it was either 2 or 3 overlay zones for affordable housing, you satisfy your obligation. Then new affordable housing ordinances have to be adopted, rezoning ordinances have to be adopted, and probably an updated housing element and fair share plan, which is an element of the master plan, would have to be adopted. And those all come through this board in the future.
Okay.
I have a question for Chris. For me, in trying to figure this out, there's 3 numbers. What we have in units for rehab, or the current round, or the third round. And there's numbers of 52, 166, and 527. Have these numbers changed for us, or are they the same numbers that we've seen prior?
The prior round obligation, that was set in, I want to say 1987 maybe was when that started, so that's settled by years and years of court cases. The rehab obligation is determined, there's a number of things that go into that. There's reports that were done going back to 2015, I think is when the last ones were settled. For every town in New Jersey, there's a rehab obligation. That's where those numbers essentially come from, is taking census data, as well as to some degree, if somebody can do it, field surveys to see the amount of existing homes in the town that are likely occupied by a lower moderate income household, and also likely in need of some level of repair. And the way they determine that is an estimation of how many homes probably don't have a full kitchen, or they're just substandard housing to some degree, and that's where that number comes from. But to be completely honest, the rehab share, or the present need as they call it, really no one really checks up on that. So you might be required in the settlement agreement, I didn't even go through to either establish your own rehabilitation program or just participate in Gloucester County's rehab program. If you're not already doing that, the county already does provide that service through, I think, through CDBG funding. They do owner occupancy rehabs for low-income homeowners. Then the third round number is the one that's been debated a lot, and there were, going back from 2013 up through 2015 or 2016, there were 3 professional reports done that were all different groups representing different entities. So there was eConsult did a report on behalf of the League of Municipalities that said, based on the Fair Housing Act, this is what we think the numbers are for each region, and then, distributed that through every town. What was it? It was something Kinsey, maybe David Kinsey, working for a group in Princeton who had done the report on behalf of Fair Share Housing Center. His numbers were extremely high. And then there was another report that was adopted. Rich Redding did one for some municipalities in Ocean County that's sort of like this third report. There was a little bit in the middle of those. Most towns, what they have done and what Fair Share Housing Center is generally accepted was there was, I think it was a judge in Mercer County had basically taken these 3 reports and heard arguments from Fair Share Housing Center and a couple of different attorneys, and said, all right, we think this methodology used in this particular report is the one that really should be applicable. And then eConsult went back and took those numbers and then applied them to every town in New Jersey. And Fair Share Housing Center is generally settled on that third round number being somewhere close to that report based on the Wilson numbers. They usually want to see, I think they basically take the Wilson numbers and then add something like 10% to that, just so they can go back to their board of supervisors, whoever it is that oversees Fair Share Housing Center, and say, hey, we negotiated for a little bit better deal. But largely those have been not settled until there's a settlement agreement. And some towns get really high numbers, some towns get smaller numbers, some towns, if they're fully built out, like some of the smaller cities that have been built out for 100 years, like say Collingswood, for example, that they've got no vacant land to put any new housing, their number might be pretty high, but they get to say we have no land to build housing, so all we're going to do is an overlay ordinance, and if any new housing comes in, we'll do a set aside. But they're not really required to do any new housing. But if they do new housing, then it has to have an affordable set aside. So a lot went into that third round number, and it's been about 7 years of constant litigation between the League of Municipalities and Fair Share Housing Center.
that number that was assigned to us at 527, Mr. Mayor, did our township committee approve the report?
Yes.
So we're in agreement?
Basically, this is going to keep us, our obligations filled through the next round.
Okay.
2 years.
Yeah, I haven't checked in a while, but I'm gonna take a guess, given the size of the town, the Fair Share Housing Center probably initially said that your obligation for the third round should be over 1,000.
Right.
And when we did some of the stuff you said, we identified some properties a year or two ago that could be included in this and all that. So, but, no, there's only 2 towns in the state that are left.
And we're one.
Us and some
I believe the number was up around 1,200 back in my
10 years ago.
Yeah. Michael, because of the litigation piece of this, this board would make a cursory, pass a motion for that we did a cursory review and we have no objections to the ordinance. Would that be the proper?
Yeah, the same as other ordinances that you review. It's under the same standard. You're saying it's not something that's contrary to the master plan, although in this case, as Chris said, we're going to need to amend the master plan for that element.
Right.
But that's understood. So you could either do nothing, or you can refer it with no comment, say you reviewed it, the same as we've done with some other ordinances. The only difference here is that it is a matter that's in court.
Right, and I just want to make sure the verbiage is correct on the motion. That's.
Now, if you needed more time to look at it, I talked to the township solicitor, Matt Lyons, today. He said if you needed more time to look at it, it would be okay, but no more than a month, because they didn't want to delay it. So if anybody needs to review it, they can, but you would definitely need to take action by next month.
I'll yield to the board. I read it, I'm fine with it. Does anybody need to table this, or is everybody
Well, I have a
okay?
question for Mike. Mike, under the agreement terms section, letters D and E, where it talks about the commitment to assist in provisions of public water and sewer, how does this work? Right now we don't have water and sewer. And paragraph E talks about if it becomes available. I just want to understand how it works. So if we're required to build a section to comply with satisfying the number that we need to comply with, and we need to provide, does that mean we need to provide public water and sewer to that section?
Let me first say that I haven't been involved in this agreement at all. I just got it, Matt Lyons has done it. So I'll just give you what I think my impression is. More or less, you can't be using water and sewer to stand in the way of a development. So if you have a developer comes in and says, I want to develop here and we're going to apply to bring water and sewer from another town, you can't roadblock that.
Okay.
Roadblock it.
All right, now,
Yeah.
the only reason
We're
I'm
not
asking,
under the obligation to provide.
okay,
We're not building, we're providing.
We had that whole thing with Meredith Farms, right? So we're going to develop that property and figure out we had all this capacity to pump so many gallons of water a day and then discharge so much in sewage, and then the well collapsed, right? So it was $1 million fix. So if a developer comes in and says, I want to, develop X number of houses, but we need public water and sewer, who's going to pay for that?
The developer.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember, it's been a few years now that we were involved in this, but Jim Winkowski and I had basically sat down and we looked at maps. We even contacted all the water and sewer authorities for the municipal utilities authorities for the towns around you that do provide a little bit of water and sewer you do have in town, and most of them did really not have any capacity either. So the assumption we had at the time was, and what it's basically going into this, I believe, is you don't have a lot of water and sewer capacity, and if a new project comes in, you're not obligated to pay for any extensions or upgrades to a water or sewer treatment plant. But if a developer has the pockets to do so, you really can't stand in their way from doing that. It's just what it
We
is.
had to identify properties,
Yeah.
That they could come in and say, okay, you can put a fair share house in here. They still have to negotiate with the property owner, they still have to acquire the property through private means.
Yeah. They
Yeah,
still have to get whatever
I just wanted to make
DEP
sure
permits
we
they
did.
would need.
Yeah.
I know how expensive that well was fixed.
Right. And I think, Jimmy, the key statement here, should public water and/or sewer become available in
Right.
Franklin, we need to cooperate. We need to cooperate.
But D, it was almost contradictory. That D
Right.
was saying, you got to do it if you want to put it, if you're required to put so many houses on the site, you have to do all you can to get public water and sewer. And then E then kind of contradicts that, saying, well,
Contradicts
if it ever does come available, you
Right.
can't stand it away. So
You
I
can't
wasn't
stand
sure
away.
how it was working.
Matt, the solicitor Matt said it was good to have a judge who understands this area, understands Franklin Township, that heard this, correct? Is that what he said? You know, he knows what's going on there. There's no words or anything.
Okay, back to the original question. Is everybody comfortable with a motion that the planning board did a cursory review of this and we find no objections to the ordinance?
I would make that motion.
Okay, I need a second.
I'll second it.
I have a motion and second. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Trevelyan?
Yes.
Mr. Ranson?
Yes.
Mayor Bruno?
Mike, I should probably abstain, correct?
I don't think you would have to. If you feel more comfortable, you can do that.
Abstain.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Chairman Pesh?
Yes. Okay. And the last item on the State Agricultural Development Committee Annual Report for year 2021. What is this about? Someone help me
I'll
here?
speak on it. The SADC, State Agriculture Development Committee, every year puts out an annual report on how many acres were preserved, how they were preserved, how much money was preserved, where they were preserved. There's maps to show you the names of the farms that were preserved. There's things called direct easements where they bypass the townships and the counties. There's some in there for Gloucester County. And then, of course, it gets into the municipal PIG planning incentive grant, where it's a cost-sharing process between the state, the county, and the local municipality. And there's some in there as well. So it's just a year review of what the state has done to preserve farmland here in our state.
Okay.
And it also, the interesting point is, out of all the states in the United States, New Jersey was identified as being the #1 state most interested in preservation.
Okay. Is there any action needed on that? There's no action, correct? So everybody has a copy of the report to review. Okay, very good then. Mike, no need for closed session, correct?
Correct. It was the solar ordinance. That was a new version, wasn't it? That we had to.
Yes, sir.
We do have to do the same thing with the solar ordinance. We have to let the township committee know we reviewed
It's
it.
not,
It's in
It is in
yeah,
there.
but it's not on the agenda. It's what
No,
I'm
it's not
saying.
on the agenda.
Okay. Yeah, give me a second to get it up there. Okay, again, this is a cursory review on ordinance 11-22 for solar. And is there any comments? Is there anything in here that we need to be aware of, Michael or Rosemary? Any of the professionals?
It was an improvement on what we had taken a look at previously.
Right.
I think it was some revisions were made that were positive revisions.
Positive reason, okay.
And this ordinance has nothing to do with rezoning or making a large solar field. This is all on private property, correct? Small individual units and commercial units?
No, actually, your ordinance wasn't very clear on solar and ground mounts versus accessory solar panels on top of the roof, and where actually they're supposed to be zoned and appropriate for accessory uses on single-family homes throughout the town, and what those requirements would be. So we just tightened it up and put it actually in a zone. But regular homes, single-family homes throughout the township would still be able to have ground mounts if they meet the requirements, and they would also be able to have roof panel solar.
We're not excluding any of our zones from this ordinance. It's an overall overlay of all zones.
No, well, it's an overlay of all zones for the accessory uses to a single-family dwelling, but for the ground mounts, it actually specifies an industrial district zone for those ground mounts to be proposed in.
It's allowed as a conditional use if it's going to be a larger commercial and has standards for the conditions for the conditional use.
Anyone else? You okay with that, Chris? No. Okay. Your pleasure on ordinance 11-22, I believe, I lost it, 11-22.
Yes.
Okay, is that a motion that we get a cursory review and that we find no objections to it? Is that what your motion is?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Is there a second to his motion?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Rosemary, for a roll call vote again, please.
Mr. Travellone?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mayor Bruno?
I will abstain again.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Ranson?
Yes.
Chairman Pesh?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. All right, this time I entertain a motion to open the meeting to the public.
Motion to open public portion.
Second? Moving second, all in favor?
Aye.
And
Motion to close open public portion.
You gotta give him time.
No, I got
I was thinking about it.
I got a motion to close. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other business? No? Hearing none, seeing none, at this time I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moving second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much, everyone.